integrity. That's called courage.
Free up your mind, use your imagination.
All you need to know is I'll get you there.
Learning.
Now that's the stuff leaders should be made of.
Welcome to the Openhouse podcast. Our guests are our students, opinionated, daring, and ridiculously smart. They ask tough questions about life and about learning. This podcast is by them and for them.
The word woke is a fairly recent addition to our vocabulary. Its history actually lies in the fight for racial justice in America. But today, being woke is used as a blanket term for being aware of social issues and for being politically correct. And while it's great to be woke and to be aware, there is a darker side to it where there is a constant pressure to know everything that's going on in the world and to always say the right thing. Today's episode is about the pressure to be woke. Thank you, Urvi and Gurmehar, for joining me for this episode. Urvi is in class 11 and is from Bangalore. She is an avid reader, a fierce intersectional feminist. She paints, writes, and dances to put off studying for her exams. And in her own words, she loves movies that make her cry. Our guest speaker today is Gurmehar Kaur. She is the author of Small Acts of Freedom, which is a deeply personal family history. She holds a master's from University of Oxford. Thank you both for being here. I want to start off with a simple question. What does being woke really mean to you?
Yeah, I'll go. Hi, I'm Urvi, first of all. To me, being woke is just being aware, like you said, right? Being aware of what's going on in the news, being aware of how different communities are being treated. And this has been amplified because of social media, because we have the news accessible on our fingertips right now. So being woke to me is just being aware and being in the know-how of what things are going on and how is it affecting people around me and me.
I think we have, I think when I think about the term woke, my first, you talk about the history of it, Sadhika, but I think my first instinctive, the image that comes to my mind is the beginning of the BuzzFeed culture, where things like woke and words like, where terms like woke and queen and, were introduced into my everyday life. And I think when I think about woke, I often relate this word to internet culture. And I think what Urvi just said, being aware of, being aware of social issues, being aware of, being a part of debates, being speaking up about the marginalized. I think all of those things often, when I think about it in my head, there are a lot more. There are a lot more either academic or activist in sense. They often come from ground, and I don't associate the ground activity and academic practices as BuzzFeed culture, which is woke, if that makes sense.
Do you feel the pressure to be woke, and do you act under that pressure?
Do I feel the pressure of being woke? And here's to say, Urvi, I don't disagree with what you say. I just feel like there might be just a very slight generational. I'm not saying generational because we're all the same generation.
I see. Yeah.
When it comes to internet trends and themes, they evolve so fast that even between you and I, we might have a 5-year difference of how we came into internet culture and how we came into what we're experiencing right now. Which is why when you talk about being woke, for you it is this very activisty. It is this space that you have almost grown up into. Whereas when I was in 11th standard, woke was something we created. So for us I think our generation was. I say generation like there's a huge gap, but I think our internet, our beginning of internet phases, I think we sort of brought an activist discourse into the internet.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that's where maybe woke and like where those cultures merge. Do I feel the pressure of being woke on the internet all the time? Um, 100%. I think pressure of being uh, woke is this pressure of being politically correct. And then again, politically correct depends on the context. Who's politically correct? Because if I look at the woke audiences, or if I look at the woke people, or if I look at people who are largely, who largely have a very progressive center left or left leaning outlook to the world, um, then the kind of politics I practice is politically correct. But whereas if I situate the same political practice into maybe a larger context of where, well, the country is heading, or the larger context of the political situation in India or in the world right now, then maybe having the conversations that I'm having are politically incorrect. And I think there's often a lot of pressure um, to 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 constantly be politically correct.
And the generation thing is also very interesting, because I was just thinking about it and how I've sort of and maybe people younger than me have grown up with the internet. They were born into the internet. They enter the world and they're like, oh wait, here's Instagram. I'll make an account and I'll follow all of these pages on my explore, and I'll be like, wow, what is body positivity? What is this, that? But when it comes to, say, people who are older than me, that was that those people created these pages. They were the starters of these pages. So many of these people don't even know about it. They've just started to know about it, which is why, in my sense, woke is just being aware. But in someone older to me, woke may be something very, very different. So that's when the pressure to be woke is even more confusing, because what does being woke really mean? Right? If it means different things to different people, how can all of us be woke?
So the
And do you act under that pressure, Urvi?
So Gurmehar has a much more public profile and persona on the internet. I don't, until I got a Twitter account. Getting a Twitter account is that sort of line that you have to walk on, which is very dodgy, because you misstep and someone said, "Oh, look what you did. Now you're gonna fall." And because of the privilege that I have, I used to have a safety net of having a private account, of having only my friends know what I think of. But then when you get a public account, that safety net is slowly being torn apart. And you make one mistake, you lose your balance and you fall straight to death. There's literally no coming back. So because of having a public account and having something that everyone can read and know about, that's where the pressure to be woke really plays in, I think.
So is this, I mean, pressure to be aware only driven by social media, or is it also around you when you meet your friends and your family in person?
Oh, definitely it is. And I think I used to be such a big carrier of that, and I'm very guilty of that. I used to, 2 years ago, I would notice myself looking down on people who didn't think the way I did. And that is so wrong, right? We're allowed to have different opinions, we're allowed to think differently, but I would look down on people. And I think cancel culture comes with a sort of mob mentality. The adrenaline we get when everybody's yelling kill, kill, kill at this one person, targeting one person, I think that's where cancel culture comes from. And I found myself doing that in real life with real people. It wasn't just a name on my screen. It was an actual real person who I loved or cared for, which became even more scary.
I think talking about keeping up that sort of persona of woke in real life conversation, I think it's especially, that's 100% something that happens, and I think it's especially amplified in a lot more academic circles. And in fact, I've been thinking about it a lot more recently. That pressure comes from this certain assumption that the woker you are, the more like you, the more woke you are, the more morally correct you are. Right? The more aware
Definitely.
you are, the better you are than other people. Almost as if you're almost as if you're the best, but there's always, and I think, and I've often seen this, even in conversations, it's how can I trump the other person by being more woke, by being more aware, by being more, by being a bigger voice for, let's say, a bigger voice for the marginalized, or, a bigger ally than the next person. And almost I feel like, and it's such a social, and it's definitely a, and it's so interesting to see how internet and woke culture sort of impacts our everyday social conversations and activity, and turns even the most normal things as hanging out into a full-on performance. These days, if you sit in a group and if you're having one, everyone has to have an opinion because it's expected of you. Mostly because these platforms, these tech companies and these tech platforms and social media platforms, their algorithm demands you to have an opinion, right? Which is why when you have an opinion there, it's almost natural. Whereas when you meet in a real person setting, we're taking that behavior and bringing it into your real life. And I think and I genuinely think it's so toxic because one, we're performing in digital space, and then we're also performing in our physical space. We're still working by our algorithm engineered personalities and not ourselves, which 100% is very unhealthy. Yeah.
No, Urvi said something in her form. She said that there is a competition on who is more woke. Can you talk about what experiences led you to actually say that?
Yeah. So what I meant was everyone sort of running this race, and the end point is this satisfaction that, oh look, I was better than you on the internet. I was more I don't want to use this, but Shashi Tharoor-esque when I was using my words, and I used bigger words and more complicated words, and I talked about issues that you couldn't see, that missed your, that were in your blind spot, right? And you see it happening so much because you're like, someone's written, why are we not talking about this? We are, but just in, we're talking about maybe a different case, and maybe we're talking, maybe someone else is talking, maybe someone you don't know is talking about that. So it's a very weird rat race situation happening on the internet, where everybody is running towards this one goal of being so morally superior to their peers, that they've lost sight that these issues that you're talking about actually affect real life people. They're not just issues to be talked about. There are people who are being actually affected by this, and it's not just some competition for you to win. It's very real, and because woke culture is so online, it sort of blurs that out. It blurs the reality of it.
I think what you said would be about people bringing in a lot of arguments. I also realized, all through all because of all out of experience. I think there's also it's there's such elitism in that. When and my first experiences of that was when I was in LSI. My initial bits of activism didn't quite come from literature or theory or what I've read or what I knew of the world, but it's straight up from like life experiences. It's an opinion I've always had, and while and as a young 18, 17-year-old, I didn't have the tools to situate it into, well, let's say a box of theory, or like and or or an ideology. When I went to LSR, and almost like because there was an accident, there was a lot of public attention on me, and I realized that I realized a lot of responses when with that, a lot of responses of people because of that public reaction was trying to engage me in a conversation that was rooted in a lot more academic, academic framework, as
Instead
opposed
of thirst trapping you, they woke trapped you,
yeah,
basically.
yeah, exactly. And,
That's a nice way to put it.
and I still remember I felt so intellectually inferior to almost most people that I was surrounded with, because I never had, so I don't come from an academic family. My mother's done her science, and then she's now working in the government. But academia or social sciences, humanities was never a conversation in our homes. Even now when I talk to her about my dissertation, my questions, she has no idea what it is. The standard way of having a good life was you graduate in sciences, as most people do, because it's the only respectable degree, and then you give your state service or IAS or army exams, and that's a good job you have, and it's a great life. Whereas, and I never went to school, so I was homeschooled. And like everybody else, I also had my 11th and 12th standard as commerce, because it's way more respectable than humanities. So when it came down to arguing from a very academic point of view, I just felt so intellectually inferior, so out of place, so out of touch. And then at that point, I just kept thinking, maybe I'm not smart enough. It was just imposter syndrome. And only much later could I, when I was much older, not much older, but much more wiser, I realized how much of that is rooted in access to knowledge. How many kids, who are these kids who are making these arguments? Who are their parents? Are their parents academics? Are these kids, did they go to fancy Delhi, Mumbai schools? Did they go to the Mayos and the Doones of the world? And I think that really, and I think you're right when you talk about people bringing in arguments from this place and that place. I think there's so much elitism in that, and people don't recognize it. You cannot. There's so. I think it's so. It's not genuine at all when you're using vocabulary that's so inaccessible to talk about the most marginalized of the world.
Definitely, yeah.
No, I think, we just we love talking about things, but just doing that isn't enough. A post on Instagram and a tweet on Twitter isn't enough. And I think we should also, I guess, ask ourselves that what are you actually doing on the ground, and what is the impact that you are making. Um, is it possible to care about everything that's going on around you? I'm just sharing a personal experience. I have a lot of friends in the US, and when the pandemic started, and I have family in the UK. So when the pandemic started, I would keep a track of COVID cases in the US, COVID cases in UK, and COVID cases in India. And as time passed, I was like, I don't care. I want to know how many COVID cases there are in Delhi and what is affecting me. Um, so I want to ask the two of you, is it possible to care about everything around you?
Absolutely not. 100%
No,
not.
no.
And I
That is
don't.
that is
Sorry, go on. Ruby.
that I don't think there's any way we can care about everything. Just like we can't know everything, we can't have all of the knowledge in the world. Similarly, we can't care about everything, and there are people who care about that. And it's not invalidating their opinion. It's not invalidating their activism or their wokeness. It's just that it will take a toll on your mental health, and it will take a very big toll. So you have to understand that these are the issues important to me, and I will talk about them, and I will try to educate myself about everything else, but I will not put this unfair pressure on myself to know about everything at all times.
I think 100%. I think I just don't think it's sustainable, and more than that, we have to understand that that's exactly what most, when we talk about caring everything. I'm going to for this, to make this point, I'm just going to assume what's happening in the country, right? What's happening in the country, what's happening with the government, the actions of the government, the things that we constantly keep raging about. Last year it was the CA, today it's the farmers' protest. Then there was the revocation of Section 370, and we've almost constantly, as young people, in the last 4 or 5 years, we've constantly been in this mode of um, constant reaction, like one after the other. And we have to understand that that's also something that the powerful want you to do. They want to keep young people constantly reacting, constantly engaging, constantly on their toes, and exhausting them. And that's what we're seeing happening right now, which is why I think it's sensible um, to not fall into that cycle of ultimate rage. I remember meeting Siddhika last weekend, and the conversation we had was, we're tired. We're just like tired of being angry, right? And that's not, and that's almost every person that I meet. We're just like so tired of always being angry. And I think the second thing about caring about every single thing, one, I don't believe as a human being one can care about every single thing. To care about something, you have to have stakes in it. To care about something, you have to know about it. So when I see people who are constantly caring about things with deep passion, I just don't buy it. I think then I can often see like patterns of performance there. Which for myself, I think one, as a public person, there's always this pressure of, oh, I have to amplify this, or I have to talk about this, because if I don't, then am I using the space that I occupy responsibly? And on the other hand, as a person, there's always this moral question of, but if I do talk about it, do I know enough about it? Do I care enough about it to further, to take further space in this conversation that might not also be about me? And I think that's something that I constantly keep that I'm constantly confused about, constantly keep thinking about. And I think the solution that I found is, if it's not something that I'm either trained to understand, if it's not something that affects me, if it's something that I'm not a major stakeholder in, I'm not going to speak about it, rather amplify people, so that space that I'm taking is can be a space that is also taken by more people, in terms of maybe amplifying those voices, and not talk myself, not have my voice be an overpowering voice. And I think that's what most people should do. Amplify voices if you're not a stakeholder, but if it's something you really feel strongly about, then definitely write about it. Organize around it 100%.
So essentially passing the mic on to people who know better than you do. Is it also then okay to say, I don't know enough and I'm going to take some time to understand what's happening and then maybe talk about it?
Definitely. Yeah. I remember when the whole farmers protest, the outrage started, not the actual protest started. I was stumped. Everyone was, all of my friends and all of my family was talking about this, but none of them had read the bills. All of them had just watched this one particular man shout in the TV, and he was just yelling that these are Khalistanis and these are this and that. I'm like, have you read the bills though? Why are you agreeing with him? But have you read the bills? And I had to take an entire week to read about the bills, to read articles, to read this and that, to understand what the issue is, and to understand, wait, how do I play into this? What is my role in it? And what Gurmehar said about us being constantly angry is so important, because I feel that's the only emotion on the internet right now. There is no empathy anywhere. We've lost that. We've lost our kindness. We've lost our empathy. We're just constantly angry at everything. And is it even possible to be angry at everything, especially if you don't know about it? So if you're delivering wrong information, it's better to shut about it and give the space to other people.
And I think just to add, when we talk about anger, it's a very reactive emotion. When we're so angry all the time, what we're not doing instead of it, we're not thinking as much, we're not reflecting as much, we're not engaging with the situation as much. We're just jumping from one situation to the other, while not giving so many causes the due attention, and mind space that they deserve. You cannot go from one murder of or one incident of rape with some women and then quickly jump on to the other and then quickly jump on to these are such delicate, sensitive issues. um, this whole reaction jumping, um, it's just something that doesn't quite sit well with me at all, and I'm very jaded by this performance on the internet. It's not, it doesn't feel, it's not informative, it's not useful. Like Sadhika said, it's not even important to speak anymore on the, it's not important to speak on the internet. The most effective way to go is work on ground. I remember when I had just, started with our earlier campaigns with Profile for Peace, or even Students Against EBVP. We entered the internet with this idea of, oh my God, this is a great tool. This is a great tool to amplify. This is a great tool to reach people from one place, transcend the boundaries of state, of nations, and really have conversations where we're not held down by, by uh, your, for example, by visa restrictions when it comes to India and Pakistan, right? It's such a great space to engage in. Whereas, and I think, whereas in the last 5 years, what has happened is it's not a great space to engage in anymore, because we're not, there's no because we're not giving enough time and enough attention to these things that we're angry about. We're not creating communities the way maybe I would have imagined the campaigns to create when we just started. And I think, which is where it just brings down the conversation to on-ground activism versus online activism. And it's so sad, because it could be such a great tool, and yet what we are seeing right now is everyone performing for some sort of social capital and not building enough communities and not building enough and not
Since this pressure to be woke exists, how do you two deal with it? Do you like switch off? How do you deal with this pressure?
I just decide to. I check the internet. I'm guilty of that. I cannot stay off the phone whenever my phone is buzzing like that. But I have to remind myself that it's okay. That it's okay that I don't have an opinion yet. That I may be angry, but I don't have to spew that hate out on the internet. There's enough of that already. It's okay for me to take a step back and read about things and inform myself and talk to people and just understand why the things that are happening why are they really happening. And most of the times I don't end up doing that. Most of the times I do put up a really angry story on my account. I do put out a really angry tweet, but I think that's where we all grow. That's where we all have to really learn.
What about you, Gurmehar? How do you deal with that pressure?
That pressure of being woke. I think I realized after 2 years of constantly acting under that pressure that I can't do it. So when it came to actually dealing about it, I was just like, I can't do this. Like I physically cannot. Like I cannot physically sit in an LSR classroom while doing an internship, while trying to submit my 3 term papers, 3 assignments that I would eventually end up having to, copy, learn from Siddhika and our friends. But I cannot sit there and write a long post, and I cannot sit there and be angry about it. I have 5 million things in my brain. It just became physically impossible, to be woke all the time. And not to say physically impossible because of me, but I think every single time one puts out an opinion on the internet, there are multiple reactions to it. And with me, they were often in terms of trolling. And I would be having a perfectly great day, where I'm like floating from one classroom to the other, talking to my friends, and I'll read one comment, and like my brain and my heart and my whole life would just sink. And that's all I could think about. and I'll just be like, maybe I'm a terrible person, right? And I just thought that entire, the disruption of the disruption it caused in my real life and my mental, my mental space was just really not worth it. So I stopped. I would have like great highs, which is great praise, and I'd be on top of the world. And 3 seconds later, it would be an absolute low. And I think that like level of up and down is so exhausting. It's so unhealthy. It's so you're almost living in like a delusional world. You're not even living in real life and space anymore. So I just like stopped reacting to things, and I only now comment on things that I genuinely, truly feel very strongly about, which is terrible for my Instagram engagement. But like I say, I would rather have terrible Instagram engagement than be a performing circus monkey for people, because that's what I feel a lot of us eventually just end up becoming, and it's so disheartening.
That trolling also doesn't only come from the right wing, right? It also comes from people who are following you, and you're like, "Hello, why have you not talked about this?" I'm like, and you're like, "Listen, I have a final to give. Give me some time." I remember when the CA protest started, I was having my boards, and a really funny thing happened that the first case in Bangalore was of coronavirus was at my center. So I was worrying about that. I was worrying about how am I going to learn all of these formulas, and I was also worried about Modi ji has said something or he's not said something, and this and that. So I feel it's we don't know what we don't know what everyone's going through. We don't know their circumstances. We don't know what is going on in their head. So it's so the whole trolling and the whole holding people accountable, using that as a farce to just bully people into giving statements is where we fail as the woke people of internet.
We've spoken a lot about the pressure that Gen Z feels to be politically correct. But do you also feel that Gen Z puts this same pressure on their parents and on older family members?
Definitely. Not only that, we'd be putting pressure on people who are above 20. We're like, why are you not talking about this? Look, we are talking about this. We're young. We care. You don't care. No, we know. We know everything that's going on. We have that mentality, and we have to realize that they have all of these internalized biases, and they've grown up with that. And if we stop holding ourselves to that moral high ground, we'll realize that we also have those internalized biases. We haven't let go of them yet. So I remember during, I'm not sure what was happening, but I had a really heated discussion with my mother because she had switched on a channel in the TV, and I did not want that channel to be getting any more TRP. So I had a
we know this is a code word.
Everybody knows. But I then looking back on it, I now think, wait, what did that? How did that play out in my mother on my mother's mental health? And did shouting do any good? Am I not becoming the person that I'm not telling her to give money to or TRP to? So I feel it's definitely there. The whole yelling at other people for not caring as much as you think you do is definitely there.
I think again, it's also such a space of privilege, and it's such a question of privilege and access to education, right? We as younger people, we have a lot of access to discourse because it's on our mobile phones. Whereas I can imagine when our parents were younger, especially, most of us, our parents have all, they come from smaller towns with, now today we have such fancy education. Today we not only fancy education, we also, and those of us who don't have these brilliant CBSE top schools in our cities, whether a small town or a larger town, we're still very much engaged in the cultural discourse and the political discourse through our phones, which is not something that our parents had. Second, it's also language. We're all talking in English. We're all a lot more comfortable with English than our parents were, which is where most of your progressive thoughts are originally originally written in. If not in English, then your regional languages, and not so much in Hindi. In Hindi, the larger conversations have often been very, very rooted in traditions. Which is something that we often hold them. That we often hold against them, and it's so, and I hate, and I absolutely, I feel terrible when I see young people being rude to their parents, because it's not it's not a sweet conversation. It's not, when I see that play out in front of my eyes. I feel so terrible when younger people are being absolutely rude to their parents, almost embarrassing them, going into their arguments and theory and academics and people to quote, and make their parents feel so small, only because they've never had access to that knowledge that today these young people have, which is why they could think as progressively as they do. And I do think, and I do think it's something that we as younger people need to be very cognizant about. We need to be very self-aware about, and we have to approach our parents with a lot more understanding than we do.
What is actually that balance? Because on a daily basis, I navigate it. I am sure Urvi and Gurmehar also do that. Um, how do you actually have a conversation then with your parents or with older family members, and they come from a different point of view and you have a different perspective? How do you have that conversation without breaking each other's heads?
I'd say avoid unnecessarily starting conversations. When it's really important, I will. But if it's just suddenly out of the blue, I'm attacking my father, and why are you like this? Why are you not like me? And why are you supporting this political party? Why are you not supporting this one? I won't do that out of the blue. I'll do that when it's important and I see something he's done or he said. It's just that they have so much going on in their lives that maybe they don't have the time to scroll on Instagram and read a bunch of infographics about why they should care about, I don't know, any issue.
I think I'm very fortunate, because a lot of my family, I mean, I'm from Punjab, so I'm very fortunate in that sense. I know a lot of Keralites would agree with me and relate to this, but I think we in I I'm very fortunate in the sense that I've grown up with family that's more or less in the same political sphere as I am. When it
But is
comes
it just
to,
about politics? I mean, take something like climate change, for example.
no, exactly. So for me, our disagreements often come on a lot more fundamental things. Wherever it would be religion, for that matter. My mother is a
Devout.
Krishna Bhakt.
Okay.
She's very into, she would dress, she would do her puja, she would dress the idol, and she's very, and she's born Sikh, but she feels deeply connected to it. And often, my LSR trained brain would just be like, what, mom? So patriarchal are these practices? This is all myths. This is unreal. And I often think how arrogant of me, and every single time I've often thought that, and now I look back to it, how arrogant of me to, to hurt somebody's beliefs and faiths, which are so harmless, you know, when it comes to religion. Whereas now, on the other hand, when it comes to things like caste, those are conversations that that I often approach with a lot more, I wouldn't say aggression, but a lot more firmness. But I've always kept that space open. I've always kept that space open for, to hear out what she has to say. And I don't approach that conversation with trying to change what she has to say. Instead, just be like, okay, I understand this is your belief, but if you are saying, Gul, I don't want you to marry out of your caste or religion because I believe in it. I'm going to tell you, you can believe in it, but I will still do it because I don't believe in it. So if you won't change your belief for, yourself, like for me, I'm not going to change my belief for you. And I think it often ends up being it's just, and there's almost like a certain respect even from her side where she's like, yeah, I'm not changing. and I'm just like, yeah, I'm not changing either. I hope we're all okay with our little agree to disagree situation.
So as Open House loves to say, you do you. I think that's really it. But before we close, those were all of my questions for the two of you. Before we close, do you two have anything to add as closing remarks?
I mean, I have questions to Urvi and you. How do
Okay.
so Siddhika, to you, how do you um how do you deal with being woke on the internet, and how do you feel about this internet culture of performativity and wokeness?
I think I don't deal with it. I mean, I'm not woke on the internet at all. I mean, I think it's the way I use social media. Facebook, I don't use at all, barely. And Instagram is for me. I think it's a place where I can put nice pictures. It's not a very serious place for me. Twitter is sort of a place to keep up with what's happening, but not to sort of express my own opinion. I think I'm quite happy with keeping my thoughts to myself and actually talking to people around me and
Yeah.
having these conversations at home and with friends.
Mm.
Not to say that these are echo chambers for me. I have family which doesn't think the same way that I do, and I have a lot of friends who don't think the same way that I do. But I think I find a lot of meaning in those conversations rather than like conversations on the internet. um, I do sometimes end up feeling that a lot of everyone is posting about the farmers' protest. Let me reshare something that Faye D'Souza said, for example. Um, but I also realize that people who I know on Instagram already know these things.
Yeah.
That's sort of why I don't also feel like posting anything, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That's such a wise way to approach it. You know,
That
yeah.
definitely realizing that these platforms aren't taken as seriously as you do. And
Hmm.
just the other day on Twitter, Modi girlfriend though was trending. So it's just Modi boyfriend though, Modi girlfriend though. So all of these things were trending. So yes, Twitter and Instagram are good ways to raise awareness and help a cause when it does monetarily. But it also becomes this, like you said, echo chamber of people who are just yes men for each other, right? And what I do if I want to share something that's a little more politically spiced on my story, I'll just block people who I know will have a problem with it if I don't have the headspace to deal with it. So I'll maybe take off someone off the story for a few days, and then when I do have the ability to have that conversation, maybe I'll bring it up. But I won't force myself to do it, and I won't force others to do it. I remember there was a few friends of mine had a tiff between them where one of them called the other one out for not posting political stuff. And you don't know what the other person is going through, is what my point is. You don't know what circumstances they are in. You don't know anything about them essentially apart from the persona they choose to put on. So I don't think it's fair for us to put that pressure on others or ourselves to be woke and be politically correct at all times.
Also,
Yeah.
just like how boring. Like you were like calling people out, so तूने ये post नहीं किया.
Exactly.
Political नहीं हो social media पे. That's
No, but somebody else also said the same thing that Urvi did. Parikshit, who was on our first podcast, he mentioned that somebody told him that, hey, you don't put out anything about mental health on your Instagram. Look, here is what I do. And it's so weird, right?
like I'm
Uh,
a psychologist. I don't want to put about it. I don't want to put it. It's not responsible first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know that this sense is there to constantly, want to say something or the other.
And I know we're going to close this very quickly, but I think this also reminds me of this incident that happened with the boys' chat room.
Yeah.
The locker room
Boys
thing.
locker room.
the boys locker room. And I remember I had a, like you said, I was very busy that day, and I had a submission the next day. And a lot of people were like, oh, Gurmehar, you have to talk about this. Look at these young boys. What are they doing? It's terrible. They're objectifying women. It's unhealthy. It's, and and you have to react to it. And I knew I wouldn't. One, because in my head, my first instinctive thought was, one, I knew these are minor boys. I knew that these are young boys. If I'm going to talk about it, I might as well go through like these series of screenshots that aren't even like in an order as they're coming to me. So I have to go through these series of screenshots of one person, series of screenshots of the other person, the third person, 5 million people, and like 5 different people, and there's stories involved in it. And I was like, okay, I don't have the mental bandwidth to maybe comment on it right now, so I didn't. What happened the following days was that somebody else did, right? And somebody else didn't just comment on it, but attacked one of the boys that was involved in it very publicly, in a very humiliating way. And what followed then was, one of the boys from the locker room situation ended up killing himself, and the person who did rage about it on the internet, and made stories and reels and calling out these boys, gained a lot of social capital, right? Tons of social capital. The greatest feminist. Look at them, and eventually, when I now look back at it, it still like it makes me so uncomfortable. It sends shivers down my spine, because those are juveniles, right? There is a certain justice system. You talked about mob mentality. There is a certain justice system that is in place. That is meant to. It is a faulty system. The prison system is faulty, but there's still a framework to it. You're not. If it's a younger than 18, if it's a boy who's younger than 18, even in a situation where that child has or where that young adult has raped a woman, the punishment is a lot more less. There are more. It's a more. The approach to it is less punishment, more rehab, as it must be. Even with these boys, I think the approach to their conversations, the things that they were saying, terrible. I definitely do not stand by it, but I think the punishment for it, or our responsibility towards it as people of the world, as adults, should have been to approach it with not this absolute mob of shunning these kids, but where is this coming from? This needs to be talked about. There has to be, this person has to go to, let's say, therapy, but the punishment shouldn't have been a mob attack where a young child committed suicide and the other person just gained social capital.
And the same person might be posting about mental health, might be talking about mental health. And it's so weird, right?
It's definitely I don't think social media is a justice system.
Definitely not.
It's as good as a TRP channel doing a media trial on young women.
I mean, I'm taking away so much from this conversation. One, that there is so much anger on the internet, but just not enough kindness and empathy. Thank you so much, Urvi, actually, for reminding us of that. But I think when we talk about the pressure to be woke, I think it's best not to confuse social media with real life, and best not to post something irresponsibly. It's okay to not know something. It's okay to walk away for some time and then come back when you want to know, or when you're in a better headspace to know about those things, to make yourself like aware and educate yourself. But this has really been a wonderful conversation, and I know that this is going to be valuable to everyone who tunes in.